Hello and welcome to the Daily Newspaper Analysis, an initiative of the UPSConline.com and Ambition IAS. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 20th of December 2017. So coming to the first article, seeing through a glass darkly. To deal with terror threat, there must be far greater sharing of intelligence amongst agencies worldwide. This is the opinion that the author has given. Now, it is very rare that I would recommend you to keep a particular piece of article as it is, because usually I believe that it is not possible to reproduce any article in the paper because of the constraint or word limit. But in a very, very rare case like this one, I would suggest that definitely this article is a key article to be kept by all students, because this is an article full of information, and so replicating this article will provide immense opportunities for you to use its data in different questions. So that way this is a very, very important article because of the facts that it provides. Usually editorial articles have more of opinion which can be extracted, but this article is a good source of information. So the first part of the article, I shall be taking this article from the editorial itself. Now the first part of our article deals with a different genre. Here the author has stressed upon the fact that how the present form of terrorism is different from that of its previous form. Now here he gives certain schools like the Sayyid Qutb Egyptian school, which is being used by the present Islamic State. So these ideologies and all, this part of information is rare to get, and the author, being a former national security advisor, has a good knowledge, and that is why he has provided this rich information which you must have. You should know that what ideology they are following. Even if you don't have an opportunity to write it in the paper, as a student of current affairs, you should have knowledge about these ideas. So this is one part that the author describes, that how previous terrorist groups had different ideologies, and now the Islamic State has an ideology that is largely that of the Egyptian thinker Sayyid Qutb. And further he says that also there is no particular theology in the present groups of present terrorist groups. Now the second part, this is very, very important because this is a background. Now, for many of the students who are freshers, they do not have a record of terrorist activities in the past. And also for those who are preparing for a longer time, it is important that you should have a summary of all the previous news items. Now, maybe in 2015, this attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris was very important at that point of time. So there is a tendency that students now might not quote it. So whenever you get an opportunity where a background has been given, a history of terror attacks has been given, you should extract it. So this part of the article has named a number of attacks where starting from Mumbai attack in 2008, then the September 11, 2001 attack in New York City. Here the author is trying to bring out that there was a different difference here in these two attacks. Also he has given some examples of other terror attacks which have happened recently from 2015 to 2017, where he says that beginning with the attack on Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris, January 2015, the major incidents at Brussels and Istanbul Ataturk airports, and further, like in further attacks in France he's mentioning, and then these attacks in 2016 to the string of attacks in London, Stockholm, Barcelona, New York in 2017. So these are some very good piece of background for terrorist attacks globally. So from that point of view, this is important. Then the author says that here he has mentioned that the Islamic State has been following this theology of nihilism of Sayyid Qutb, who was in Egypt. That is the ideology that these people have been following. Also here he explains that how the strategy that the Islamic State is using through internet, it is brainwashing youth, and how it is recruiting young people, educated people into its cadres. That is one thing. So that is how this is very, very important. Then coming to this part of the article, it is again a very important piece, because this part of the article brings to light the various terror groups that are prevalent. Now what happens is that because terrorism is so prevalent in today's time, there is a tendency that we paint all the terrorist groups with the same brush. That is not the quality. That can be a quality of a layman who is aware of knowledge, but this is not accepted of a UPSC candidate who should have some deeper knowledge. This topic is important from your internal security point of view as well as for international relations. So in that context, you should have this background knowledge. For example, the author here has mentioned of Al Qaeda and its affiliate, the Boko Haram in Africa was responsible for more killings than most people would realize. Further, he talks about other groups like Afghan Taliban and Haqqani Network. Then he talks about the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and Lashkar-e-Jung in Pakistan. Also, the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba in India. So these are the various terror groups that are in operation in our time. So this is important from that point of view. Now coming to the next part is that of incorrect perception. Now this part is again very important. Why? Because you have to understand that the person who shall be correcting your question papers will be somebody of the caliber of the author himself. It could be a retired IAS officer, or even if it is not a retired IAS officer, he shall be a professor in international relations. So the person will be a very knowledgeable one. Now what happens is that in the answers, students tend to write simple things that, like, this editorial is about analyzing intelligence agencies. So what might happen is that you might have a tendency to criticize intelligence agencies on the grounds that they are not very competent, or they do not have technological advances, they are not able to meet the threats that are coming on social media and all. So if you are going to write these kind of superficial suggestions you're going to give in your answers, the expert will immediately recognize, like in this case the author has immediately discarded these opinions and has said that how the intelligence agencies are very very apt and very much trained, and they're using state-of-the-art technology in intercepting. So that is the idea, that your knowledge, your answers should have a reflection that you have read and you have done your homework and you are well aware of what are the real issues. So the author has brought about few real issues. The first real issue is that of not that there is an intelligence failure, he says, but there is an intelligence gap. Now this is important. He says that despite all the information, they are not able to get a catch hold of terrorists because this loop of a string of information is incomplete. There is a gap. Like in the Mumbai attack, the author claims that there was not a intelligence failure, but rather there was no intelligence on the movement of these terrorists. So the author has made a case for greater sharing of intelligence amongst countries, calling terrorism a universal problem. So that is the opinion that the author has given. Also, he's saying that this is important when it comes to unearthing covert terror networks, and many intelligence agencies today have extensive database of several thousands of terrorists and potential terrorists, but the issue is that of sharing this database. So this is the whole crux of this article. Now here is where the opinion is. This is the opinion part of this article. So I would again suggest that you should cut this piece of article, and if you're not good at cutting, maybe you should copy the backgrounds and the history that the author has brought about. So this is an important article, though it is based on a single opinion, but it has good facts, so that way it is important. Coming to the next article, this is a column article which is on the e-way bill for transport of goods. Now recently the background is that the government has proposed an e-way bill. Right after the Gujarat elections, the government has preponed its date of implementing this e-way bill under the GST regime. So what all is there in this bill? The article is a summary of that. So I've covered the salient features. First is that all interstate movement of goods worth over rupees 50,000 will be tracked with the introduction of an e-way bill system under the GST regime. So this is the first point. Another thing is that all consignments moving more than 10 kilometers from their origin will require prior registration and generation of an e-way bill through GST network, which will be valid for a varied duration depending on the distance traveled. So every movement of goods more than 10 kilometers or value more than 50,000 rupees are now liable to have an e-bill generated by the manufacturer or the point of origin. That is the new bill, and it is on the basis of this that a tax will be generated. Now the issue is that of capturing intrastate trade. Now you have to understand that basically there was no idea of intrastate trade in the previous regime, and that was there. There was a tax on interstate movement of goods, but there was no tax on the intrastate trade. So this is a new arena which has been included to ensure no tax evasions, and this will increase the revenue of the government. All right, now then another point is that it will result in a fully integrated tracking system for all taxable goods. Now the issue is, coming to the fifth point, the issue is that it is a headache for firms operating across states, as they will now face differing compliance requirements from for both interstate trade as well as for intrastate trade, depending upon when states will launch their e-way bills. So obviously this has a ramification on the on the taxpayers, because now they have two requirements to fulfill. First is that of inter as well as intrastate, and also this the states have their own bills already passed for the interstate aspect, so matching those will be another issue. Now the next point is that previously, as I mentioned before also, that the previous VAT regime did cover interstate trade, but that did not cover the intrastate. Also, the new e-way bill has a provision of some exceptions, which has 150 common use items like the LPG, vegetable, food, raisins, and goods moved on. And it is also having an exception for goods moved on non-motorized conveyance, example on carts. So these are the salient features of the bill that is to be proposed. Also, this article gives a good analysis of the GST, where it says that revenue inflows are falling for states. This is an important issue because GST was earlier aimed at increasing the revenues of states, but the figures are showing that revenue inflows are falling, and this will have ramifications on the fiscal deficit and the revenue deficits of the country as a whole. Another thing is that the states that the states post the implementation of GST are claiming a revenue shortfall of 40,000 crore, which needs to be compensated. So this is again a stress on the budgetary constraints. This is again a budgetary pressure for the government to meet this demand of states. That is another thing. Also, the e-way bill and the matching of invoices, these are some new provisions under the GST. They are aimed at making tax evasion difficult and thereby increasing the the revenues of the government. Also, the author has wrote about a case of Karnataka, where the e-way bill system had been implemented by the state and it was a major success. Also, the article brings out certain suggestions, which are that simplify onerous rules proposed for e-way bills. This is always with tax. For any tax administration related issue, the primary thing is that rules should be made simpler. So even in this case, that is a suggestion. Another thing is that focus should be on ensuring a stronger IT backbone. That is another thing, both information technology as well as income tax backbone. So that is important. Also make inspections the exception and not the norm. That is what the author is saying, that inspection should be a exception but not the norm, because this was the criticism of previous tax system for which GST was launched. It was said that when VAT was to be implemented, for hours trucks would be held up for interstate trade, and this was really slowing down and impacting trade. So that was one suggestion. Now coming to the next article, this is an article on the business page, and it is important from again factual point of view. These articles, whenever on economy and all, they provide a lot of data, and as I have maintained before also, that remembering the figures is not important. What is important in economy is to remember the trends. You need not know how much lakh of crores deficits have been wrongly reported, but you should know that definitely deficits have been reported wrongly. That is the key. So this is a report of the CAG on the Fiscal Regulation and Budget Management Act. Annually, a report is given by the CAG on this. So firstly, coming to what is FRBM Act 2003. This was an act that was introduced, as I have written, in the year 2003 to ensure fiscal discipline in the government. Now, what was happening was that the government was spending more and then it had revenues, and for this the government was borrowing more and more money from international sources, and this was increasing the liabilities of the country. So it was decided that there should be a discipline that the government should follow, and some targets should be set. For example, 3% of fiscal deficit should not cross 3%. That is one target, suppose. So this was the whole idea of FRBM Act. However, post the 2008 crisis, what happened was that the FRBM targets could not be met. Governments all over claimed that FRBM targets cannot be met for the simple reason that governments will need to spend more because to revive the economy. So it was foregone at that point of time. Now there have been debates that the economies have overcome the 2008 crisis, and adherence to FRBM provisions should again be made. However, last year the finance minister himself had said that they will come to the set targets, but they need some time frame for it to help the economy regain. So that is one issue here. So I have brought about what this report has said, some salient features of that report. I have made them concise for your understanding. So the first thing is that there is an understatement of fiscal and revenue deficit. Now this article also gives me an opportunity to explain to you what is fiscal and what is revenue deficit. This is especially for the freshers. Now fiscal deficit is, whenever you hear the word fiscal, you should understand that fiscal is related to tax. So fiscal deficit is the difference between the expenditure and the revenue income of the government. All right. Now suppose the government has to spend 1000 crore. This is just a figure that I'm for your understanding purposes. No government can survive by spending only 1000 crore rupees. So suppose a government has to spend 1000 crore. This is the expenditure, and the government is getting only 500 crore through its revenue income. So that means 500 crore will have to be to spend 1500 crore will have to be borrowed. All right. So this 500 crore, which is the difference between the expenditure and the revenue income, is fiscal deficit. All right. And fiscal deficit shows that how much a government is supposed to borrow. So that is what fiscal deficit is. Now revenue deficit is the deficit between a revenue expenditure and revenue income. Now revenue expenditures are like expenditures on interests. Revenue expenditures are like expenditures on creation of certain capital assets, on maintenance of government machineries. These are revenue expenditures. And if revenue expenditure is more than the revenue that the government is generating, that is going to result in a revenue deficit. So that is what revenue deficit is. All right, both fiscal and revenue deficit will show how much a government will need to borrow. And for that borrowing, again, the government will have to pay an interest. So this becomes a vicious cycle kind of a thing. So for regulating the fiscal and revenue deficits, FRBM was made. So now the report has said that there has been understatement. That means the fiscal deficit and revenue deficit was more, but the government has stated it less. All right. So that means actual amount of borrowings have not been shown. This is a major concern. Another thing is that deferred payments of more than 1.87 lakh crore. Now here the report says that the government had to make some payments of in the tune of 1.87 lakh crore, which the government has again not made. So if this expenditure has not been made, and it was supposed to be made, again the revenue deficit will narrow and the fiscal deficit will narrow. So that is why the deficits have been narrowed, because these payments have not been made. Another thing is that there is a misclassification of revenue expenditure as capital expenditure. Now capital expenditure is expenditure on forming capital assets. This is for the development of the country. For example, making a new road or making a new infrastructure project. So that is capital expenditure, because that is an investment, that is sort of a capital. Whereas a revenue expenditure is one for the daily functioning of the government. So if you will classify revenue expenditure as capital expenditure, it is a sort of sanitization of expenditures. So that is another major issue that has happened here. Also, the author says that rupees 20911 crore collected as levies and cess has not been transferred to relevant funds. Now you have to understand that CAG is basically the most important office when it comes to accountability of the executive, financial accountability. It is the purse of the parliament, so that is the importance of CAG is also generated in this article. So he has said that so much amount of crores of rupees of levies and cess have not been transferred to the relevant funds. Where have they gone? That is another issue. Subsidy claims were pending. That a lot of subsidy, petroleum subsidy, farm subsidies, these food subsidies, these are major burdens on the exchequer. And if these subsidy claims are pending, then definitely fiscal and revenue deficits will narrow. So that is one case. Devolution of taxes to states was short. Now we all know that the government has moved towards cooperative federalism, and it has favored greater devolution of taxes to the states and has diminished the amount of central sponsored schemes. So The report says that devolution of taxes to states was short. This impacts the intergenerational equity in fiscal management as envisaged under the FRBM. Now, there's an intergenerational equity, which is that year-to-year fiscal management. This is impacted, and this is not envisaged in the FRBM Act. So, issue of transparency in government account statements. This is of utmost importance because we are a parliamentary form of government, and transparency is the hallmark of parliamentary form of government, a democratic country. So, these have been compromised. Difference in figures reported in various documents. Now, this is another important point, that in the annual financial statement, some figures are reported. In other government documents, other figures are reported with relating to the fiscal and revenue deficit. So this, reflects the problem of improper coordination in different government reports. So that is another issue. Another last point is that failure to meet FRBM targets for 2015. That is, the CAG had concluded that FRBM targets for 2015 and 16 have not been met, and claims of the government that it has met the targets are falsified. So this is an important report. First, from the role of FRBM. Another from the role of accountability of the government, there it can be used. Thirdly, it is important from the powers of the CAG, which is important on the General Studies paper 2. So this is an important article, though a bit factual one, but it becomes important. So with this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching this video. I hope you will recommend our video to your friends, and we shall welcome your feedback. So thank you again.